To our top story now, President Biden is in Italy this morning for the first day of the G7 summit. Moments ago, he gathered with other leaders from the group of 7 nations for this year's so-called family photo. The president will now attend multiple working sessions throughout today. Afterwards, he'll meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and sign a 10-year security agreement between the U.S. and Ukraine. Joining us now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. She's live in Bari, Italy, with more. Monica, what can you tell us?
Well, Mika, this is set to be a very consequential meeting of these leaders where there is so much on the agenda, perhaps at the very top of the list, how to continue helping Ukraine in its defense against Russian aggression as that war stretches on for more than 2 years. And we do expect that by the end of the next couple of days, there will be some kind of agreement between the G7 leaders on how to help Ukraine get more military aid in the access of funding from seized Russian assets that have been frozen. Now, there was a little bit of debate over exactly how to do that and whether that would be presented to Ukraine in the form of a loan that will be paid over some years based on the interest of those frozen assets. So we expect those kinds of details. And National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said that he does expect an outcome on that in the coming hours. But there is, of course, also the larger dynamic right now of the shifting winds in European politics and the fact that when you look at those different leaders who greeted President Biden this morning in Fasano, many of them, including President Biden himself, may not be there at the next G7 summit in 2025. There have been many, of course, questions about elections in the UK, in France, in Germany, where many of these leaders have fairly low approval ratings. And then, of course, President Biden is facing re-election in November. So that is the overall backdrop to these conversations and the larger looming question of even if there are things that the leaders agree to and try to set into motion, will some of those things be undone or incomplete because of whatever happens a year from now? And then, of course, we expect that the leaders will also continue to discuss the potential ceasefire deal that President Biden and certainly other leaders internationally have been pushing for Hamas and Israel to accept to end the war in Gaza. We expect there will be discussion of that in addition to countering China and specifically trying to issue Russian sanctions from the U.S. against some China-based companies that are fueling the Russian war machine in Ukraine. So those are some of the expected thorny issues and topics that the president will be discussing with leaders. And then tomorrow he's expected to meet with Pope Francis, who is coming to the G7 in a historic manner to discuss the issue of artificial intelligence, some of the advantages of the technology, but also some of the dangers that it presents. So a jam-packed couple of days here for the president in southern Italy. Willie.
All right, NBC's Monica Alba in Bari, Italy for us this morning. Monica, thanks so much. So, John, the president running hot. He's in Normandy for almost a week, comes back for a few days, going back over to Italy. What does he hope to take away from this G7? What are the objectives that he may leave here in 3 days having achieved?
First of all, not a bad place for a summit.
Not bad.
Looks pretty nice.
Not bad.
There are a few things here. As you say, this is a second trip to Europe in a week. Ukraine is at the forefront here. He's going to meet with President Zelensky later today. Actually, the two men are going to hold a joint press conference. The president will take a few questions. We should note this will be the first time he takes questions from reporters since the conviction of his son. So there'll be probably some domestic matters that also get asked about there. But it's about this deal here to open up for Russian assets to help support Ukraine. But part of the framework is to keep aid to Ukraine going no matter what happens in a series of elections this year. We just saw the EU elections, of course, over the last couple of days, the far right making some real gains. And, of course, the November election in the United States looms, and there's some hope here that commitments can be made to ensure that some U.S. aid will continue to Ukraine, even if Donald Trump, who is a Ukraine skeptic, were to return to office. And I also think this is the president's last major summit before the election, and I think there's going to be a note of reassurance as he tries to his fellow leaders of democracies to say, look, you can count on the United States. We're not going to go anywhere. But we know there is rampant anxiety among those men and women that we're seeing in this family photo about what a Donald Trump return would mean, how he has threatened alliances before, how he has said that he wants a more isolationist foreign policy. So this is President Biden trying to say to them, look, I can't guarantee the future, but we are Americans. Certainly, if I win again, we can do this. But even if I don't, there'll be a way to keep America involved. But it's a real sort of anxiety-filled summit right now there in Italy.
You know, Steve Ratner, we're going to be talking about this a little bit later, but it's fascinating that this G7 summit takes place against the backdrop of the strongest U.S. economy relative to the rest of the world. And then there's been in decades. I mean, we had a report yesterday that the world economy is doing okay, thanks in large part because of the unexpected strength of the U.S. economy. As the World Bank said, the impressive U.S. economy is powering the world. Impressive resilience, growth buoyant, and the teeth of the fiercest monetary policy tightening in 4 decades. Strongest dollar in almost half a century. So that's the backdrop of Joe Biden there, about how we're powering the world right now with our strong economy. Also, though, as you look at those pictures, I'm curious your thought. You have, of course, the Chancellor of Germany, who just suffered a blow with the far right in Germany, doing so well in EU elections, blow to his reputation, his party's reputation. Of course, the same with Macron, especially. But fascinating, the one person who did well is actually Meloni and her party, who, when she came in, was perceived to be an enemy of the EU, a far-right extremist because of her party's roots with Mussolini. But she's ended up actually being really pragmatic on the world stage. Talk about that, talk about the economy, and just your general feeling about where Europe is right now.
You're exactly right, Joe. First, excuse me, on the Meloni point, she is the only member of the G7 who has a higher approval rating than Joe Biden, but she's still at 41%. And when you look across the EU, as you said, you see leader after leader, country after country, where you're looking at approval ratings for their leaders at 24%, 28%, in the 30s. Rishi Sunak, who you didn't mention, but I'm sure you were thinking about, has a snap election coming in July. And by all accounts, he is going to get wiped out, and it could be one of the largest majorities for Labour in a long time. And I think it does relate to a considerable extent to the whole growth picture. We've grown over 9% in total, our economy, since the pandemic started. Canada is at 5-something, and everybody in Europe is at 1%, 2%, 3%. And so the elections last weekend shouldn't have been a total surprise in the sense that Europe is really, really struggling economically, including and indeed especially Germany, which has, of course, been the powerhouse of Europe for so many decades. But between the impact of the Ukraine war and the fact that Germany is a major exporter to China, and all of that is now under a lot of pressure, it is a really, really difficult time for Germany. So Europe as a whole, I think, a mix of the effect of the war, which is something but not the only thing, but frankly, simply having economies that have just not performed well over a long period of time. They don't have the flexibility of our economy. They don't have the productivity. Look what's going on in AI, for example, at the moment. We dominate AI. There's one company in France and a couple in the UK that are in the mix on AI, but everybody else in Europe is just not present, and that is potentially a huge driver of future growth. There's simply a set of economies that have not delivered for their citizens, and therefore the citizens are taking to the ballot box in a way that is very, very scary to all the rest of us.
I've got to say also, there is a reality, and there was an FT article about this a couple of months ago. There is a new reality that approval ratings don't line up with victories or losses at polls as much as they used to. And of course, the greatest example of that would be Macron, who was sitting in the low 30s to the mid 30s in approval ratings in France before he had his election against Le Pen, and then he ended up with about 58%. So there's angst across the Western world, and it is driving approval ratings of all leaders down.
For sure. So former Republican House Speaker and board member of the Fox Corporation, Paul Ryan, appeared on Fox News earlier this week and drumroll please, criticized Donald Trump for calling him unfit for office.
It's going to be a very, very close race. I think they're terrible choices that we're being presented with. And that's just the fate of that's what the primary voters selected. And I regret the fact that that's where we are.
All right. Now, I know a lot of these folks who also shared your same concerns about Donald Trump have sort of said, all right, we're rallying around Donald Trump. You had said, though, that would not be the case with you. You had said that he's a populist and an authoritarian narcissist, that character is too important to me, and it's a job that requires the kind of character he just doesn't have. That's pretty strong.
Yeah, that's the way I feel. I agree with that. I don't support Biden either. I think his policies are terrible. I hate the fact that I feel like I had to write in a Republican like I did the last time in 2020. I voted for him in 2016, hoping that there was going to be a different kind of person in office. And I do think character is a really important issue. If you put yourself above the Constitution, as he has done.
But what happened?
I think that makes you unfit for office.
Was it the whole January 6th thing?
That's a part of it. I think it's a contribution of factors, but I think it really is just character at the end of the day. And the fact that if you're willing to put yourself above the Constitution, an oath you swear when you take office, in federal office, whether it's president or a member of Congress, you swear an oath to the Constitution. And if you're willing to suborn it to yourself, I think that makes you unfit for office.
Let's bring in MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle, the host of the podcast On Brand with Donnie Deutsch. Donnie Deutsch, editor of the nonpartisan group Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter, and former U.S. attorney and the MSNBC contributor Barbara McQuade. She's the author of an extraordinarily important book every American should read if they want to know what's going on right now. Attack from Within. How disinformation is sabotaging America. And by the way, it makes a wonderful Father's Day gift. Willie, I've known Paul for a very long time. He worked for a group of us when I first got to Washington, and I love the guy. I really do. I mean, he's a wonderful guy, a wonderful man, and I'm so glad he's speaking out. I think he's on the Fox board or the News Corp board. He's on one of the boards. So he's in a position of authority over there, and that's not something a lot of people would do. Just to speak out like that. So I appreciate that. I will say the thing I don't understand is understanding that this guy's an authoritarian, understanding the dangers that he presents, and then saying, well, I can't stand Joe Biden either, and I'm going to vote for, I hate his policies, I'm going to just write in a vote. Well, if you feel like democracy's on the line, if you feel there's an authoritarian waiting, really what is so offensive about voting for a man who's presided over the strongest economy in the world, an economy that the World Bank yesterday said is fueling the world's economy, the Dow's at over 40,000. We've never been stronger economically relative to the rest of the world since 1945. Our military's relative to the rest of the world never been stronger than it is today either. So I'm grateful that Republicans like Paul Ryan are not voting for Donald Trump, actually proving they actually believe what they've been saying their whole life, and that will be enough to defeat Donald Trump. I just wonder how you can say he's an authoritarian, he's a threat to American democracy, he doesn't have the character to be president, but I'm not going to vote against the one guy, but I'm not going to vote for the one guy that can keep him out of office.
Yeah, there's even among Donald Trump's critics within the party, within the conservative movement, there's always a yes, but sort of equivocating in some way that Joe Biden is equally bad in his own right. You know, that criticism from Paul Ryan, certainly not the first time he's criticized Donald Trump, was relatively mild. It was substantive. I didn't think he was out there throwing bombs. I think some of the points were pretty obvious to most people who watch politics. And for that, Trump-supporting members of Congress in the House, one of them called Paul Ryan a piece of garbage for the comments you just heard there, and said he is not a real conservative if he doesn't support
just the opposite.
Donald Trump.
So what,
Paul Ryan,
conservatives are liars?
Just the
conservatives?
Yeah, just the opposite, Willie. Paul Ryan, one of the most conservative guys I worked with in Congress. I mean, here was our big difference was he was a tax cut, I think, at all costs guy, and I was about balancing the budget, bringing down the national debt. And we talked about this, but we were both conservatives. We were just sort of in different wings. We were both economic conservatives. We were just focused on two different things. But nobody that worked with Paul would ever say he wasn't a conservative. And yet, anybody that saw what Donald Trump while he was president, raising the national debt more over his 4 years than any president in U.S. history.
Yeah, I mean, it's laughable. Amanda Carpenter, people who are actually real conservatives now, because the window has shifted so much under Donald Trump. And as we were talking about in our last hour, that Donald Trump will be up on Capitol Hill today, and he will be followed through the halls by all those members of Congress who want to be seen with him, who want to kiss the ring, who want to take a picture with him for their campaign ads, all of that, who call themselves conservatives, and yet they're just following a man, not really even an ideology, a theory of economics or politics or anything else.
Yeah, you know, I wish in these interviews that Paul Ryan does, he could get to a place to actually talk about why he isn't the House Speaker anymore. I mean, it is good that he says that Donald Trump is unfit for office. And he's been saying this numerous times, you know, over the years in various interviews. It's notable that he said it on Fox. Also notable that that interview was confined to the 4 p.m. hour, because I don't think that Paul Ryan would be welcome to be saying those words in the primetime hours where the majority of Fox News listeners are really reached. And so, you know, what is frustrating about this is that Ryan and other Republicans that take this position, I think they're expecting people to read between the lines way too much. I think they tell themselves that if I go out and say he's unfit, but I can't vote for Biden, and somehow, you know, I am saying the words that I think Donald Trump is authoritarian. I'm saying the words that I think he's dangerous. And then if I say I don't like Joe Biden's policies, like, other people are expected to give me credit and do the work there. I'm sorry, that is not enough. Paul Ryan needs to talk about, there is a reason why I'm not the Speaker of the House anymore. My views are being pushed out of the party. We are not a big tent party right now because Donald Trump expects Republicans in any position of power, whether you're the House Speaker, whether you're a Senate Republican, to act as his legal and political shield. That is why Donald Trump is going to the Hill today. He can say, his campaign aides can say they're going to talk about his legislative agenda. We already see what that looks like with these endless investigations to nowhere that have been led by House Republicans into the Biden family, into Merrick Garland. I mean, this is where this is going. This is how he wants the party to act as his shield. That is the reason Paul Ryan isn't there anymore. And, you know, also, it's good that there are other Senate Republicans who won't take that meeting, but they're saying, oh, it's a scheduling conflict. Why don't you come out and say, I am not going to meet with someone who is practically and morally responsible, in the words of Senate, Mitch McConnell, for sending a mob to the Capitol and stopping the peaceful transfer of power. I mean, we need to start saying it very plainly, very clearly, in ways that are unmistakable, because there is a faction of Republicans who are not going to go along with this. They're not successful, obviously, in stopping Trump from becoming the Republican nominee once again for the third presidential election in a row. But they need to be vocal and make it known that they are there. And that is the only way that we're going to grow that Republican resistance that will be responsible for having any chance of making the party responsible again.
Let's go to Capitol Hill now, where former President Trump will be in Washington today, where he is set to meet with Republican lawmakers from both sides of the Hill. A senior Trump campaign official tells NBC News the meetings will be focused on policy, zooming in on Social Security, taxes, border security, and a, quote, America First foreign policy. While Trump's visit is being presented as a positive development by some in Senate leadership, Senators Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitt Romney will not be attending the meeting. All three claimed they have conflicting plans. Meanwhile, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell will attend, giving him his first face-to-face with Trump since 2020. Take a listen to what the Minority Leader said yesterday when asked if he would confront the former president.
You know, I said 3 years ago, right after the Capitol was attacked, that I would support our nominee, regardless of who it was, including him. I've said earlier this year I support him. He's earned the nomination by the voters all across the country. And of course, I'll be at the meeting tomorrow.
Well, that'll be an interesting dynamic, Mark Leibovich, to see McConnell there with Donald Trump. Donald Trump going to visit the office buildings, will not be at the Capitol. Obviously, January 6th hangs heavy over this visit, even though the president was not technically at the Capitol that day. He held the rally that drove the people there. So what do you expect today? What is the dynamic at play other than all of these Republicans who have fallen in line, save for the small handful who have conflicting schedules, perhaps a root canal for Mitt Romney?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's notable that McConnell kept referring to Trump as him. I don't think he mentioned his name once. He acknowledged that the Capitol was attacked. I also think that the dynamic with these things, especially when you hear coming in that the president or the former president's aides say that they expect the meetings to be about policy. Yeah, that's always true when Trump's meetings are involved. Yeah, total wonk, really in the weeds on this. I mean, look, I think this will be, I assume, when he's with the other Republicans, a complete, show of sycophancy, which is what the party has become. I don't know how you can ignore, I assume they will, but I don't know how you ignore the fact that this is all taking place in what was, one of the great places of disgrace of his presidency, if not the. And that's where he left Washington. I mean, when he took off from the White House 3.5 years ago, I mean, the Capitol had just been sieged. And, he came, it happened the same day that Joe Biden was inaugurated in the same place that he was calling for an attack on. And look, the synergy here, or the sort of the symmetry here of it all happening is really quite notable. But I expect it'll be the same old thing, which is the falling in line and basically a kissing of the ring over however long the meeting goes on for. But they won't be talking about policy.
Joining us now, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale, who'll be covering these meetings. So, Ali, what should we expect today? What is Congress preparing for?
To be a fly on the wall when Mitch McConnell walks into that meeting with the former president, Willie, because you guys are so right to point out the awkwardness of this. As someone who's in the Capitol almost every single day, to ask Senator McConnell any kind of question around Trump is to know that you're going to get some kind of very tense answer that doesn't really seem to say the thing that we know is at the heart of this, which is what McConnell said in the aftermath of January 6th when he said, and I'm quoting, that Trump was practically and morally responsible for provoking what happened on January 6th. And I don't think that we can stress enough here the ways in which the insurrection still hangs over the Capitol every single day. It doesn't just take the former president coming up there to remind of the role that he played in it or of the way that it happened. It is the reason why we see such high levels of vitriol in the halls of Congress. It's the thing that when I hear from Democrats who point to the other side, it's the thing that they continue to come back to. And it's why it's so hard to find bipartisanship. I know it was this way before, but the role of the insurrection is still so palpable just in the way that Congress functions, or rather doesn't these days. And I don't think that we can underscore that enough. On the policy piece of this, I think we're all right to sort of shrug our shoulders when we hear lawmakers say that the focus of the former president's meeting is going to be about policy. To the extent that it will be, I've talked to several lawmakers, including the speaker, who say we want to be prepared if he wins again, and they felt flat-footed the last time. Taxes, of course, is going to be huge.
Yeah, and it is striking, too, the last time we were thinking about Donald Trump on January 6th, 2021, around the Capitol anyway. Many of the people who will be chasing him through the halls and trying to sit at his feet on this day were condemning him on the floor of the Senate that day. So, Ali, let's talk about the contempt vote in the House. 216 to 207 was the vote to hold the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, in contempt because he will not release those audio tapes of the sit-down interview President Biden held with the special counsel. What more can you tell us about how this unfolded?
won't release the tapes, Willie, but remember, the committees that want the tapes also already have the transcripts. They're still pushing for them. And what the Speaker told us in the minutes after this vote last night, which passed along party lines with only one Republican voting against it, the Speaker said to me earlier in the day and then to reporters after, the House did its job today. He felt it was important to put this message out there. Now, of course, we know the Department of Justice, backed up by the Biden administration, is exerting executive privilege over this audio. The DOJ lambasted the House Republicans last night for turning something that they say is an important congressional authority into something that's partisan. But I thought it was notable for the one Republican, Congressman Dave Joyce of Ohio, who voted against this. In a statement, he explained why, and I'll read it to you in part, where he says that as a former prosecutor himself, he says he can't in good conscience support a resolution that would further politicize our judicial system to score political points. The American people expect Congress to work for them, solve policy problems, and prioritize good governance. Enough is enough. Of course, he's part of a Republican majority that as soon as they assumed gavel power, Willie, they said that oversight of the Biden administration, digging into what they call the weaponization of government, was going to be key focal point. So clearly that is the priority of the way that Republicans want to do governance in the House.
This morning, the House Ways and Means Committee will hold a hearing on the recent surge in anti-Semitism on college campuses across the country. According to the organization Hillel International, more than 1,800 anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses have been reported since the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack in Israel. That's a 700% increase compared to last year. Joining us now, the founder and chairman of the nonprofit Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law, Kenneth Marcus. He's also the former Assistant U.S. Secretary of Education for Civil Rights. He will be testifying at today's House committee hearing. Mr. Marcus, thanks for being with us this morning. Those numbers are staggering. What do you want to tell Congress today? How do we change the trajectory of where this seems to be headed?
It's good to be with you. What I want to tell Congress today is that what we are facing is a crisis, even beyond the numbers, even beyond the incidents, many of which are violent and appalling. This is a bit of a wake-up call, not just for the Jewish community, but for all Americans, that what we're seeing is a fundamental change in our higher education culture. This is going to affect us all, and we're all going to need to deal with it.
So what are some ways we can deal with it? What are some, I mean, this is such a complex problem, obviously, but what are some concrete steps that can, like, start that process?
Well, Congress certainly should pass the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act in order to provide the tools that the U.S. Department of Education needs in order to make sure that colleges are in compliance. Universities need to look at their policies to make sure that they're in a position to deal with some of these violent uprisings, some of these protests gone wrong, some of this mass harassment of Jewish students. But it goes beyond dealing with specific incidents. It really is a wake-up call to ask fundamental questions. What are we doing as a people in which students now, American college students, are aligning themselves in many cases with a so-called resistance movement, which has been violent and terrorist? I think it's more than just a question of how to deal with specific discrete questions. It's also a question of we really need to do some soul searching as to how we got to this point with American higher education and how we can turn things around.
Ken, you've mentioned the phrase wake-up call several times in a very brief period of time here this morning. My question to you is, how many college presidents need a wake-up call?
Well, it seems all of them. I mean, the fact is there are a small number of college presidents who have issued statements that show moral clarity. Others haven't been able to do even that. But the fact is that statements only go so far. What we need is bold actions. What we need are new policies, but we also need a certain inward thinking. We need educators to act like educators and to ask the question, what are the roots of this violence that is spreading on those institutions that are supposed to be oases of tolerance and reason and light, and which have instead become spreaders of this virulent anti-Semitism and undermining of values that we should all be sharing?
It goes without saying that we've said this many times over the last 8 months or so, that if this were any other group aside from Jews, and we're seeing and hearing the kinds of things that we're seeing and hearing on college campuses, and not limited, as you know well, to college campuses. Some very ugly attacks here in New York City just the last couple of days of red paint being thrown at people's apartments and triangles marked for death on people's doors, Jewish people. Why the equivocation in this case when, of course, we wouldn't see it with anyone else?
It is startling to see the double standards. Institutions that are quick to respond even to microaggressions against other groups are unwilling to deal with macroaggressions against the Jewish people. Some of it has to do with misunderstanding about the nature of anti-Semitism. Some of it has to do with confusion over a form of discrimination that university administrators have thought was a part of the past. Some of it is an ideology in which DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion offices, tend to think about Jews as being privileged white groups that don't necessarily need their protection. And now they're realizing that there is a form of bias on their own campuses that is very different than what they've been trained to address.
All right. Former Assistant U.S. Secretary of Education for Civil Rights, Kenneth Marcus, thank you so much for being on the show this morning. We appreciate it.
My pleasure to be here.
So this afternoon, Senate Democrats are set to force a vote to enshrine protections for access to in vitro fertilization. The procedural vote would need 60 votes in favor to pass. It is not expected to meet that threshold. Democrats are pushing what they call a comprehensive package of fertility bills that includes protecting IVF access and making the procedure more affordable. Republicans call the vote politically motivated and unnecessary. Instead, yesterday, they tried to pass their own IVF legislation. Their bill was much narrower in scope and does not address potential legal consequences surrounding the disposal of non-viable embryos. Democrats blocked that bill from passing. Joining us now ahead of today's vote, Democratic Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii. What can we expect today? And can you explain why these votes are taking place? The first one, of course, and now the IVF vote.
Well, after Roe fell, a lot of women were harmed, a lot of families were harmed, and I think one of the problems that we have right now is that people believe in their heart of hearts that Republicans wouldn't go through with the things that they are absolutely going through with. Now, 1 in 5 couples have difficulty conceiving, and in 2022, 85,000 babies were conceived using IVF. And so our message to the public is we're going to protect IVF, we're going to protect contraception, we're going to enshrine Roe if you give us the trifecta, and that the Republicans are deadly serious. The Susan B. Anthony list, certainly the MAGA court, have not made it unclear what their long-term objective is. And it's not just to take down reproductive choice, it's to take away any choice, any ability to determine the size of your family, when you start a family, and the circumstances under which you can interact with your doctor. If you find that you're having trouble conceiving and having a baby, if a doctor comes to you and says, we want you to consider this procedure, that should be your call with your spouse. And it's not going to be your call with your spouse if the Republicans win the trifecta.
So, Senator, tell me, why in the world would Republicans vote against a bill that most Republicans, especially Republican women and young families who are Republicans, who are conservatives, for a procedure that provides life, provides hope for parents across America? Why would Republicans oppose that?
Well, I think it's a super smart question, Joe, because we now know this is not about protecting life. This is about controlling females. This is about controlling bodies. This is about controlling the extent to which people can make their own choices about their own families and when and the circumstances under which they're going to start a family. And this is a bill that enshrines in statute the right to IVF. 85,000 babies were born using this miraculous procedure a couple of years ago. I can't imagine, if you consider yourself pro-life, to be anti this, but that's what they mean by pro-life. What they mean by pro-life is we want to control and legislate what happens inside of the body of half of all Americans.
Senator, it's Jen Psaki. I wanted to ask you just about the Republican bill, because I think what they're trying to do here, I would assess, is kind of muddy the waters a little bit. Like, they're trying to protect IVF too, but there are some specifics in that bill, if I read it correctly, that are hugely problematic. Like, only in vitro fertilization is only protected if you have Medicaid funding, which a lot of states don't have Medicaid funding. What are the other things people should understand about what was so problematic about that bill?
Well, I think it's super narrow is the first thing. And second, you're right. A lot of states that have declined Medicaid expansion are already those conservative states. And so it lines up perfectly with their ability to block IVF in those states. And look, we just think this should be a federal right. And this goes to essentially the theme of Democrats over the next 5 to 6 months, which is we're going to protect your fundamental rights and freedoms. Your freedom to control your own body, your freedom to vote, your freedom to move around, your freedom to have economic mobility. It's very clear to me that Republicans are terrified, in particular, about IVF and contraception, which is why they are trying to create cover. But everybody understands that right now Republicans are about to vote no on this because the Susan B. Anthony list told them to do so.
All right, Democratic Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii, keep us posted. Thank you very much. We'll be watching today. We appreciate it. Thanks for coming on this morning.
Thank you, Senator.
Meanwhile, the Southern Baptist Church, the nation's largest Protestant denomination, voted to oppose the use of in vitro fertilization. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin has the details.
The ayes have it, and the resolution is adopted.
This morning, the nation's largest Protestant denomination voting firmly in favor of a resolution against the current practice of in vitro fertilization. It's the first time the convention, representing 13 million Southern Baptists, has voted on the issue.
Dangers that come from mishandling or abusing these kinds of things would not be considered ethical by us.
Dr. Albert Mohler helped draft the resolution.
IVF has been around for decades. Why now?
Well, the catalyst was undoubtedly the decision by the Alabama State Supreme Court. Sometimes there's a catalyst that all of a sudden helps to awaken the Christian conscience on these issues.
The resolution, which received about 60% of the delegate votes, supporting a decision in February by Alabama's Supreme Court, which ruled embryos are considered children.
This resolution affirms that, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Unequivocally.
It also calls for members to advocate for the government to restrain actions inconsistent with the dignity and value of every human being, which necessarily includes frozen embryonic human beings.
It's not just a statement of sort of moral principle. It's calling on members of these faith communities to lobby the government to restrict IVF.
Still, the decision was not unanimous. Some delegates shared stories of lives enriched by IVF, including Daniel Taylor, who spoke on behalf of his godson's parents who conceived using IVF.
I cannot believe we are privileged to have him in our lives. Because of him, I thank God for IVF.
Why are you disappointed by this resolution passing?
I think that some of the language is a little harsher than I would like. Some of the language implies that there is no use for IVF that is ethical. And whereas I know of circumstances, because my godson was conceived in this circumstance, where IVF was used in a very ethical way that is consistent with pro-life and Christian ethics.
Joe, I want to get your take on this, church, but also, is this in the Bible? Is this in the scripture? Is this where is this coming from that is related to the actual religion involved?
I mean, I've talked about this before. I mean, from the birth of Christ through 1980, Southern Baptist Church was pro-choice. I mean, there was nothing revealed over those almost 2,000 years that made the Southern Baptist Church, another mainline Protestant church, go pro-life. They did for political reasons. And again, I mean, you can, if you're actually interested in the history and if you're actually interested in the facts, you can You can trace it back, as I've said, to Richard Viguerie and Jerry Falwell and conservative activists deciding that they needed to beat Jimmy Carter, who was a Southern Baptist Democrat, and they were going to use abortion to separate Democrats from the Southern Baptist Democrat. And so they did. And Paul Weyrich also. I mean, so this was planned. And they said, but we're not only going to make it a political issue, we're going to make it a religious issue. And so they started a process that now, got to say, makes life much harsher and more frightening for 10-year-old rape victims, for victims of incest. And now in this move, I must say,
families desperate to have
families
babies.
desperate, and we know about this. My family knows about this personally. Families desperate to have babies. I mean, I grew up. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, and this is, again, I think there's a very extreme view for the convention to take on the whole.
Yeah.
I will just say, if there is such value for life, then I think the Southern Baptist Church should have a very, very harsh, direct statement on the death penalty, on war. If they, again, they can do that. I know there are other people of faith who are pacifists, who value life to such a degree that they believe that even war is a sin. And I would just say, again, as I've said here before, the Bible, the New Testament, the Gospels, the teaching of Jesus Christ should instruct Christians to do what they believe, should instruct in areas where Jesus was silent, in areas where Jesus didn't talk about, for instance, abortion, which is not, this is the lie that the hard right will tell you. This is a lie. The hard right will tell you that this is a contemporary issue. It is not a contemporary issue. It was an issue in ancient Rome. It was an issue, even Aristotle actually talked about this issue hundreds of years before the birth of Jesus Christ. So this was a contemporary issue. It just happened to be an issue that Jesus didn't talk about. And even the Catholic Church, not to get too deep into this, but this is important, even the Catholic Church over the centuries went back and forth over, saying abortion was okay through the quickening. But it was back and forth when humans decided how they wanted to interpret the gospel of Jesus Christ. But to claim Jesus is against this and Jesus is against IVF, that's just, there's no scriptural basis for it. Again, people can use the scriptures to instruct, but please leave your self-righteousness like at home and get out of my face with it. Because if the Southern Baptist Church was passing resolutions in the 1970s that they were pro-choice, are you telling me that my grandmother's in hell now? My mom's in hell now? My dad's in hell now? Because they were practicing members who went to church 4 times a week and brought us to church 4 times a week? Because everybody before 1980, when Richard Viguerie and Paul Weyrich and Jerry Falwell cynically decided to use this as a political issue, that somehow those Southern Baptists are lost? It's a lie. It's a lie that's been spread over our lifetimes. And I'm not here saying that the churches don't have the right to be pro-life or even to be against IVF. But don't hide behind the gospel of Jesus Christ to do it. You can say, I've read the scriptures and I've been instructed by it, and this is on my heart. Just like people who are pacifists who don't go to war. Right. Just like Catholics who have been against the death penalty, Catholic priests who have been against the death penalty for quite some time. So, I mean, it's very selective here.
It is.
And it's
judgmental.
It's very selective, it's very judgmental, and it's very driven by politics.
So
I will say,
you keep your judgment to yourself.
Let me say, I'm talking mainly about Protestants here, because I will say Catholics, for a much longer time, have seen abortion as a central tenet in their faith. This, though, this is, like I said, Protestants just figured out that abortion was a sin, not after the Beatles broke up, but after the Eagles broke up. That's how hilarious it is that they're now putting this as a central tenet of their faith. Instead of just saying, we've read the scriptures and this is something that's on our hearts. And we feel this way, but we're not going to judge you and say you're going to hell because you're taking the position that we took for hundreds of years.
The Sugar Hill Gang performing the 1979 hit Rapper's Delight, considered the first popular record in the genre of hip-hop. Over the last 50 years, hip-hop has cycled through countless stages, subgenres with chart-topping hits, often reflecting top-of-the-mind political issues for artists and their fans. The roots of hip-hop and its evolution over the past 50 years, the subject of the new book, Hip Hop, His History. Joining us now, its author, 6-time Grammy Award-winning musician, Academy Award-winning filmmaker, and co-founder of The Roots, Questlove.
Wow,
Quest, so good to see you.
That was impressive to hear.
That was build-up, and I couldn't even fit everything in. Tonight Show, upstairs, everything else you got going.
A few other things, you know.
DJ of all the biggest parties across the country. You're doing it all.
I'm trying to do less work now.
There you go. So we were just talking, we're basically of the same generation. I grew up on late 80s, early 90s hip-hop, which is where that's my favorite stuff.
Same.
Where do you trace the birth of hip-hop? And then we can kind of walk through its growth into the mainstream.
Well, you know, one of the things that I try to uncover is that, yes, we gave it a birthday. We said August of 1973, but, you know, even before August of 1973, the spirit of hip-hop has always been prevalent in black music culture. Like, even if you look back in the 40s during the Renaissance jazz period, like, that was seen as outlaw music. Hide Your Daughters. Ray Charles, turning gospel music into salacious sexual songs. That was outlaw music. And even if you look at like the Last Poets, the Watts Prophets, Gil Scott-Heron, like hip hop, the spirit of hip hop has always been there. But, you know, we mark the August 1973 day of Kool Herc doing a back to school party to raise money for his sister's school clothes.
On Sedgwick Avenue.
On Sedgwick Avenue, as the moment in which you're hearing the breakdowns of songs, like that magical 4-bar part where it's just the drums, and it causes excitement in the room. So, so most people will agree that August '73 is the starting date, but I mean, hip hop has been here since we've been here.
You mentioned the outlaw piece. I know one of your favorite groups and mine is Public Enemy. Put NWA obviously on the West Coast in that category. There was, for a kid growing up in the suburbs loving the music, there was a safe distance from danger, you know, from a lifestyle that I only heard about through the music. How important were those bands, those groups, to the growth of hip-hop?
You know, I've been noticing, even when writing this, that a lot of people's sort of first look at black life were through the music. You know, and rarely do people actually immerse themselves inside the river. They like go right to the edge and see, oh, what are they doing over there? But for Public Enemy, I always describe it as, you know, when the rock generation gets the Ramones, or the punk generation gets Bad Brains or Sex Pistols, hearing Rebel Without a Pause back in like 1987 was like that moment for me in which like their entire album, well, one, just woke me up. But also, their album made what I thought the boring part of my parents' record collection like come alive. Because suddenly it was like, wait a minute, where did I know that from? Wait a minute, and then you put two and two together, like there's no feeling like that discovery.
Joe,
you know, one of the things, Questlove, that one of the reasons why I told you that I thought A Summer of Soul was the best music documentary I've ever seen is because it wasn't really a music documentary. It was a documentary about culture. It was a documentary about race, about politics, about faith, about fashion, you name it. It encompassed just an entire culture, an entire time. And I'm wondering how that translates to this book, because I know it's the same thing. I mean, even generational. I just have to bring this up. One of my favorite parts is poor David Ruffin sweating in velvet, and then Sly came out, and everybody's like, wait, what's he wearing? He's got a white drummer. What's going on up there? he played by his own rules, Sly did. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering how did you explore it in this book how this is so much more than a book about music?
Well, I'm glad you said that, because when I'm done here, my follow-up film is the documentary of Sly and the Family Stone, and I'm gonna actually finalize it.
Oh my God!
Wow.
Today's the last day. Like 2 years of working on this. So basically, this book and the previous book, Music is History, was actually the result of me trying to find ways. Like I would use creativity to calm me down in the pandemic. So the stress of surviving the pandemic, worrying about my loved ones in the pandemic, and being handed the responsibility of telling this story, the Harlem Cultural Festival, in the pandemic, I needed something to distract me, to just calm me down. And so I would DJ online, 4 or 5 hours. I was DJing every night on social media during the pandemic, and I wanted to keep kind of a meticulous record of all the music I played. And so 5 months into it, suddenly I had 2 books worth of music, and eventually my publisher was like, well, you're not DJing online, you're more or less giving a college course, so why don't we turn these into books? And so this is actually the result of me trying to find a hobby to stay calm in the pandemic while I worked on Summer of Soul. So I've worked on like 5 things, and this is like one of the last things I worked on during the pandemic.
Some people learn to bake bread. You did this.
Exactly. I wasn't breaking bread. I was making bread. So.
Well said. So tell us where you traced the history here. Tell us where hip hop is now.
You know what? I'd still joke with myself that if adults are jarred or somewhat they don't understand it, then yes, then it's right where it should be. Because I think when something becomes like your parents' music, it might have that jump the shark moment. Yeah. And the spirit of hip hop is still alive, and will continue on. And then I'm sure after Generation Alpha, there will be another music art form that we will. I'm almost expecting for like white noise and environmental noises to be the new thing. Like the way that Andre 3000 is going, like a more primitive expression. I fully support that. So.
Nobody understands music better than you. We have to give a shout out to a guy we were just talking about in the break, which is Ralph McDaniels.
Yes.
I grew up around New Jersey. We didn't have Spotify. There's no YouTube. There's no other way to see video, really hear the music.
Video Music
A couple
Box.
radio stations.
Yeah.
Video Music Box really helped bring that culture across the river out into the world.
Yeah, even before MTV Raps. And, I lived in Philadelphia, so even a short proximity to New York, like I had friends and cousins up here that would always make tapes so I could watch it. So even way before MTV Raps, like Ralph McDaniels, the person that's showing you these groups like Ultramagnetic MCs and The Audio 2 and JVC Force, like these groups that you never heard of that were making these life-changing classics. And especially that period between like 85 and 95, like that's when the rules were written, bent, rewritten, and basically run our lives now. So
I
love Ralph McDaniels.
I love him too. Shout out to Ralph McDaniels. At some point, hip hop culture just became American culture, right? I mean, it's mainstream.
It starts off as a subculture, then dangerous culture, and then becomes everyone's culture.
Also got to congratulate you guys on 10 years of The Tonight Show.
Yeah.
The first thing Jimmy says when you talk to him was, I got the roots and I knew we were going to be okay. Because so much of what you guys do is musical. So congratulations on that.
Thank you for that.
Congrats.
Thanks.
You're a very, very busy man. The new book, Hip Hop is History, is on sale now. New York Times bestselling author, Grammy and Academy Award winner. Did I get it all, Quest?
I think so.
Okay.
Some of them.
Thank you very much. Also, Steph wanted me to ask you about the Wordle today. Don't give it away, but is it hard or easy?
You know what? I've been doing so much press for the book that I've not been in our Wordle group, but Stephanie is in my Wordle group.
Yeah,
yes.
Quest leads a prominent Wordle group in this building. Quest, congrats on the book. Hip Hop is History is available now. And that does it for us this morning.